This is PJNET.TV, and this is my perspective and comments. In this video segment of my perspective and comments, we cover politics, society here and abroad, and the events of the day that are shaping our nation. PJNET.TV, my perspective and comment, coming to you with a worldview, one nation under God. Hello and welcome to my perspective and comments. I want to start out with a review this week of coronavirus, Wuhan virus, China virus. The name keeps changing, but we have been dealing with this now for over a month, and we'll take a quick snapshot of what's been taking place. We've been seeing some states around the nation that have been, their numbers of infections have gone up, and we hear the usual suspects saying, you know, did the states open up too quickly? And that drum beat, you know, you keep hearing the talk about, well, we may have to do a second shutdown. Folks, that's not going to happen. President Trump has already said it. As I had mentioned before, Steve Mnuchin, Secretary of Treasury, said, no, we're not shutting down our nation again. But the media wants to stoke the flames of that possibility. That's not going to happen. But it's expected. And it's expected, one, because you've got more testing that's taking place. They're testing everyone everywhere that they can. And obviously you're going to see more infections identified when you're doing this widespread testing. And naturally, when people start mingling again and living their life, you're going to see the numbers. But let's not forget, folks, why this whole shutdown took place, that we did not overrun the hospitals. We're not even close to that right now. You might hear some rumblings by this fake media talking about, oh yeah, you know, the hospitals could be overrun. No, that's not true. We're seeing the opening or talks to open up a baseball, and NBA's talking about opening NFL, and they're just going round and round about the procedures that will need to be done for these sports events to take place, and will there be fans in the seats? That's still an open question. We're seeing NASCAR right now. We're going to be, I believe it's the next, their next race, that we may see some stands or some fans in the stands. So, and we've seen the PGA coming online again. So we'll see some golfing taking place. The nation is opening up, and it's time that these slow-walking governors open up their states and get the boot off their residents. I want to talk right now. We're right in the middle of, you know, after the death of Floyd and the riots that have taken place, and Black Lives Matter and Antifa and others that have been fomenting. Now, again, I'm just going to say this: there are some people in Black Lives Matter that aren't looking to tear down this nation. But folks, if you check out Black Lives Matter, their mission statement and their beliefs, it's an eye-opener. And when you look at this Black Lives Matter as a whole, there are some definitely disturbing mission statements and what they believe and what they want to see the society look like. And we will talk more about that in some future video segments. What also incorporated in that group is Antifa, and they are outright, they're looking to tear down this nation. And I believe that there's some foreign actors that have been feeding that and fomenting that that group, and they aren't a peaceful group. They're not peaceful protesters, but they're anarchists, and they've been raising havoc. Well, we see it on display there in Washington, there in Seattle. But what I want to talk about now is there's been a big push, and you've probably seen in the news of our many statues being pulled down. And this seems to be a growing push that they want to tear down our history. And we're seeing that in other areas, not just statues, but hey, let's talk about our foods. We see now Aunt Jemima's gone, Uncle Ben's gone, cream of wheat is gone, and you know, it's. I want to talk quickly about you know, Aunt Jemima. And Nancy Green was she was hired to be a spokesman for a Quaker Oats, and she was a former slave. In 1890. She at that time frame, she was a former slave, and they hired her on to be a spokesman. She was a cook, and she was a very personable and a very popular person. And before she died, she was a very popular in Kentucky, and did quite well in finances. Obviously, they did pay her well, and she was well off, and passed down some of her successes to her family. But it's that type of you know, person. There's history there, and we just see these now. Look, these are companies, and you know, I have less. You know, I have less outrage that these companies, private companies, can say we're going to change the label on this product or that product. But to go in and start tearing down in our public spaces statues is outright wrong. And we're seeing it more and more. In fact, we saw a skirmish here where I believe a life was taken because there was a group that was standing up to protect one of the statues there, I think in Arizona possibly, and a tragedy took place. But things are heating up, and it's getting violent. And at the other area of to tear down other areas of you know, we talked about statues, we talked about food. Now let's talk about TV and our culture that we see. Law and Order was a casualty of this remove anything that has to do with our police. Live PD, a show that was on the stations. Cops, the show Cops, have been taken off, and on and on. Also, the movie Gone with the Wind, done. So you know, we just see this erasing of our culture, and when will it stop? Because now we get into this slippery slope. There used to be book burnings, and now is that what we're going to do? Who's going to be the authority that says, oh yeah, I don't like that book, I don't like that movie, I don't like that person, that show or that movie was critical of LGBTQ, so we need to blackball that film or that actor. And we see more and more of that targeting that's taking place. Now, I don't know, folks, if you've heard, but there's the mayor, Jenny Durkin there in Seattle, says, come on to her city, because they're right, Seattle's right in the middle in the 6 blocks of the summer of love. And, here we go. Here's this mayor kind of being light and saying, hey, it's peaceful. Folks, during the day, it might look peaceful. At night, crimes taking place, and people that live in that 6 blocks are scared. And I've heard some interviews by some people that they're outright terrified of what's going on, what they're hearing at night in those neighborhoods. Gunfire, people screaming, and it's not peaceful. And folks, something needs to be done. And I know President Trump has been holding back because, hey, there's a governor in that state. That governor, Jay Inslee. And it should be the governor that should be going in there and saying, we need the National Guard in here now. And it not now, but a week, 2 weeks ago when this whole mess started. And if they keep... So at this point, folks, what's taken place this past week is they went from 6 blocks and they negotiated, I guess the mayor's department or the mayor herself negotiated to bring 6 blocks down to 3. But the bottom line is there's an occupation. And they went from Chaz to Chops, changing their name. And what they want is free health care. I mean, they have their list of demands that they're telling Seattle, you need to meet these demands. But what needs to happen is someone either bring the police back in to bring order or have the National Guard come in and resolve this situation. Because what happens is this is a precedent that's being set. And when you have this anarchy going on, if it's not dealt with, you're going to get more of it. And right now we see the government there in Washington is failing. And I want to point out too, folks, this Jay Inslee, 8 months ago now, 8 or 9 months ago, this guy was standing before the TV cameras on a debate stage because he wanted to be the Democratic nominee for President of the United States, Jay Inslee. And we see outright failure, despicable failure, that he hasn't stepped in and told the mayor, get control of your city. If you don't, we will be ushering in the National Guard. But folks, pray for our nation, because we're really seeing a whipping up of anger. We're seeing hatred on display. We're seeing evil on display. Pray for our nation that God would move in, and there would be a calming. And it really, Christ's love needs to come into this situation, because right now, as a nation, we have camps that aren't seeing eye to eye at all, and that's what needs to happen, because these problems, these issues are not going to get resolved if people can't come together and reason together. So keep our nation. This is something that is going to play out. There are things, hard decisions that have to be made by leaders to get on the right road. And one of those is to bring law and order back, especially in the state of Washington, in Seattle. So keep those residents and those businesses there in that state. And obviously, throughout our nation, we're seeing upset, and the protests are still continuing on. And keep our nation in prayer in those, in this stretch of time, that God would move in, and that people can come together, reason together for the benefit of everyone in our nation. And also keeping in prayer those men and women in blue. Over these last few weeks, we've really seen the nation eyes, and we've seen many in our government that have been painting with a broad brush and besmirching our men and women who lay down and stand in the gap for you and I. And we need to lift our police officers, men and women that have said yes to protect and serve. And again, we have this broad brush that seems to be splashed across that our police officers somehow are systemic racism. And we see that across our nation now, that people are charging that not just the police, but it's woven in every part of our society. And I don't take to that. And it's one of those other things that we've seen some of these groups come up with these charges. Yes, we are sinful, and there are bad people out there. There is evil out there, and it comes in every part of life, in government, in law enforcement. You name the profession. We're people. We're human, and we are fallen. But to paint this broad brush against our men and women in blue, we need to keep them lifted up in prayer. I want to also talk about another institution that we want to pray for our nation, and that is in our court system. That's in our judges. And this past week, many of us were disappointed of what has taken place. We've had Justice Roberts here in the Supreme Court, who has been a disappointment and outright. When President Obama was in office, he basically, the Obamacare, and talking about how that was going to be paid for. Well, Chief Justice Roberts stepped in and basically rewrote portions of Obamacare so that it could pass through as constitutional. And here we go again. Chief Justice Roberts steps in again and takes off his judge hat and puts on a legislature's hat. And when it comes to, there's two court opinions and rulings that came down. One was the LGBTQ, and that basically what they and Judge Roberts let Neil Gorsuch write the opinion. He was on the left side of this opinion, and that was a 5-4. That was a ruling that came down. I believe it was six of the justices. But in any case, it was a majority. So we had some of the Gorsuch and Roberts sided with the left side of the court, and it comes down to they went back to 1964 Civil Rights Act, and what they did is they wrote in. Now. They said, okay, we're not just going to include African Americans, but we're also going to shove in the LGBTQ. And again, we have these judges basically writing law, and it should go back. There should be legislation, and our legislators should be not writing law as they did here, and has so many ramifications here with this LGBTQ. Basically what they're saying is, if you have someone that walks in and gets into, say, a Christian bookstore, and this individual gets hired, and all of a sudden he's coming into the bookstore wearing makeup, a man coming in with wearing a dress and makeup, and obviously there's something wrong here. Now, is the Christian bookstore going to be handcuffed and say, well, there's nothing we can do? Now we're talking about customers and people walking into that bookstore that may not want to participate in that sickness. And again, we see definitely the enemy at work here, and we need to pray for our nation. Also, I want to point out, in talking when we were talking Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts there on the Supreme Court, he also joined the Democrats, a 5-4 decision for DACA. President Trump was looking to change that, and to actually the so-called dreamers, and the court stepped in once again, and at 5-4, Roberts sided with Chief Justice Roberts sided with the left side of the court. So, really disappointing. President Trump we have Gorsuch and Kavanaugh, and to be quite frank, there seemed to be some optimism with these picks, but we're starting to see more and more as time goes on some disturbing decisions that are coming out of that court from those judges. So we want to pray. Obviously, the Democrats, they push a lot when it comes to picking Supreme Court justice, that there is a litmus test and they have to meet this criteria. And I guess at this point, President Trump seemed to go through this list. Kavanaugh, that he wouldn't have been my first choice, but as it is, we see some disturbing rulings coming out of the Supreme Court. So pray for our nation, and it's not just the Supreme Court, but we're seeing things that are taking place also in the lower courts too. Activist judges and going in and basically writing law themselves too, not interpreting the law, but actually writing it. So keep our nation, again, as I've said, our nation, our court system in prayer. I want us to take a look at a verse, and it's in Luke chapter 10, verse 41 and 42. And this is where Jesus is coming into a village, and he's invited in to the lady's home, Martha, and her sister Mary. And Martha is busy, having Jesus come in, and she's going about her entertaining of Jesus and trying to meet all the needs, and she gets frustrated. She's spending all her time preparing the home for Jesus and working as Jesus is there, and she gets frustrated. And I just want to think, sometimes when we are entertaining and we have guests over, loved ones over, and we're so busy doing this, that, and the other, do we miss the quality time of just sitting down and conversing and really have that a close communication back and forth? So many times we might get wrapped up in the entertainment part that we really lose just that fellowship and to sit down and enjoy each other in conversation. And that's what we see here in verse 41. Luke chapter 10, verse 41. And excuse me. And Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things. Verse 42. But one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen the good part, which will not be taken away from her. And we see here Jesus just letting Mary know that, letting Martha know that Mary was there at Jesus's feet and listening to his words as he was there. That she couldn't get enough of Jesus. She wanted to be close. She took that time to listen and to have that communication and enjoy having Jesus there in her home. And I think it's important that you and I, when we can get so wrapped up in things that we don't take that time. And I'm speaking to myself, folks, to take that time, that quality time with Jesus, that time in God's Word, that time in prayer. With this fast-paced life that we can get wrapped up and really lose that sight to stop, slow down, and really take that quality time to speak to the Lord and be quiet and let God speak to us. Just something that we want to remember, taking that time, not to be so wrapped up in, we may be running around doing good things, but are we really taking that time to listen to what God has to say to us? Because we can get so wrapped up in this, that, and the other, and this appointment, that appointment, and the needs of this world, that we lose track of making sure that we know what God wants us to do, how He's trying to talk to us and to communicate with us. So, folks, keep that in mind too as you go about your day and as you just hone out time to be with the Lord, that we just slow down and really focus on that time that you have set aside to communicate and listen and read God's Word and listen to what God has to say to you that day. And that's my perspective and comments.